there! You're hurting my arm!
Comply with instructions.
I suggest you to leave my daughter alone now, or you'll regret it.
A teenage girl went for a simple jog in her own neighborhood. Minutes later, she was face down on the pavement with a broken arm. And the cop who did it had no idea she was the daughter of a world-famous actor. It started like any other Saturday afternoon. Imani Rollins, 17, had just wrapped up her physics tutoring session and wanted to clear her head before dinner. She slipped on her black running shoes, tied them tight, and zipped up her Navy college track hoodie, the one she was so proud of. The words Benedict College Summer Program stretched across her chest in faded gold. Her mother bought it for her in South Carolina after she'd been accepted to the early STEM prep camp. Bellwood Hills wasn't exactly lively. It was clean, quiet, and mostly still. White fences, manicured lawns, and streets that almost made you whisper without knowing why. She'd lived there since she was 12, and most people knew her face, even if they didn't always remember her name. She never had problems, until now. She tapped her playlist on her phone, slipped her earbuds in, and set out toward Western Drive, where the incline would challenge her breathing. It wasn't even 5 minutes before she saw it. A black and white Ford Explorer patrol car. Parked. Driver inside. The kind of presence you notice even if you're not doing anything wrong. She glanced once. Kept running. 2 blocks later, she looped around to Danbury Lane and saw the same car again. This time it crept forward. Her music was still playing. Something about the tempo changed in her head. Her jog slowed to a brisk walk. She didn't want to overthink it, but it stuck in her gut. A cop car circling the same block she was jogging through, in the neighborhood she lived in, felt like a silent accusation. She reached up and tugged one earbud out. Then she heard it. "Hey!" She turned. Officer Brian Kellner stood about 20 feet away, hand on his hip, jaw clenched. She didn't know him. Not by name. She didn't know that he'd transferred from nearby Norwood just 2 months prior. All she saw was the badge and the tone in his voice. "You live around here?" he asked, stepping forward. "Yeah," she said, blinking. "I'm jogging. I live on Bramble Street." He kept walking toward her. "ID?" "I'm jogging," she repeated. "I didn't bring my wallet. I don't have anything on me." "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Imani." His eyes narrowed. "Last name?" "Rollins." He paused. "Put your hands where I can see them." She blinked again, this time confused. "Wait, what?" "Hands up, now." There was no one else close enough to intervene. The closest house had its garage door open, but no one in sight. Imani hesitated, just for a second. Her palms lifted slowly. "This is crazy," she said, voice cracking slightly. "I literally live right here." Kellner took another step forward. His hand reached out fast. He grabbed her wrist. "Ow! Hey! What are you—" She tried pulling back. That's when he yanked her arm downward and forced her body toward the sidewalk. Her knees scraped the concrete. Pain shot through her elbow and wrist, and then she heard a crack. It was so quick, it didn't feel real at first. She screamed, "Stop resisting!" He barked, "I'm not resisting! You're hurting me!" The pain overtook her, but the shock kept her conscious. She was crumpled, her arm twisted under her. A neighbor's door slammed open in the distance. "What the hell is going on?" A woman shouted. Kellner turned his head but didn't answer. "Get off her!" Someone else yelled. But that was only the beginning of what would come next. Officer Brian Kellner's grip was firm, calculated, the kind of hold that said he'd done this before, many times, and didn't plan on letting go until he felt like it. His knee pressed against Imani's back. She couldn't see much, but she could hear everything. The shuffle of approaching footsteps, the rising pitch in the voices around her, and her own breathing. Short, panicked, uneven. The sound of a neighbor's phone capturing video pierced through it all. "Sir, let her go! She's a kid!" That was Mrs. Albrecht. Everyone in Bellwood Hills knew her. Retired schoolteacher, walked her beagle twice a day. Imani had helped her carry groceries once when her wrist was in a cast. "She said she lives here." Albrecht's voice quivered, but she stood firm. "She's not doing anything wrong." Kellner glanced up. His expression didn't shift. He kept his weight on Imani's back, one hand still pressing her arm unnaturally across her shoulder blade. Her forearm felt like it was hanging on by threads. She matched the description from dispatch, he muttered, finally addressing the small crowd forming on the edge of the sidewalk. What description? A man called out. She's a teenager jogging in her own neighborhood, man. I need everyone to step back. Kellner barked. You're interfering with an investigation. Imani whimpered. She tried to lift her head. Please, my arm. That's when Albrecht stepped forward again, holding her phone in front of her like a shield. I'm recording this, she said, her voice steadier now. And I'm calling the station. Someone needs to call her parents. This isn't right. Kellner let out a frustrated exhale through his nose, but loosened his grip just enough for Imani to shift onto her side. The damage was already done, her left arm bent at a sickening angle. He radioed in for medical assistance, still trying to control the scene. She resisted, he told dispatch. Possible dislocation. Minor. Minor? Imani gasped, tears spilling down the side of her face. You broke it. She wasn't shouting. She didn't need to. Her pain said everything. Paramedics arrived 5 minutes later, sirens cutting through the early evening quiet. 2 EMTs knelt down beside her, asking for her name, if she could feel her fingers, if she had any allergies. She answered in whispers. Her good hand trembled as she tried to push herself up. Let her talk to her parents, Albrecht insisted, standing over them. One EMT gently helped Imani sit up, supporting her injured arm. We'll get her to St. Luke's, he said. You're gonna be okay. She closed her eyes. She wasn't sure what okay meant anymore. As they lifted her into the ambulance, someone in the crowd murmured, Didn't she say her last name's Rollins? That girl looks familiar. The paramedic next to her raised an eyebrow. You said your name is Imani Rollins, right? She nodded, grimacing. Yeah. He looked at her a moment longer, then leaned in quietly. You're not related to the actor, are you? She looked down, her breath caught between words. He's my dad. The EMT didn't react right away. He just nodded slowly, as if putting the last puzzle piece in place. He glanced out the ambulance door, where the officer still stood, arms crossed, pretending nothing unusual had happened. Inside the ambulance, Imani's phone buzzed. A message from her mom popped up on the screen. She hadn't answered the earlier call. Her mom had probably seen the footage already. It was spreading fast. A deep ache settled in Imani's chest. Not just from the pain in her arm, but from the knowledge that none of this would have happened if she looked different. She knew it. Everyone outside that ambulance knew it. But there was one person who still didn't. Officer Brian Kellner stood on the sidewalk with his hands on his hips, watching the ambulance drive away, unaware that the girl he just threw to the pavement was the daughter of one of the most recognizable faces in America. He didn't know her name would light up headlines by morning, but the damage he did wasn't about fame, and that's what made it worse. The ambulance had barely cleared the end of the street before phones lit up across Bellwood Hills. The videos, 2 of them, had already made it into group chats, onto Facebook timelines, and one had even been tagged in a neighborhood watch forum. What began as a typical Saturday afternoon had cracked open something much deeper. Linda Albrecht sat down on her porch step, hands shaking. She hadn't planned to get involved. She wasn't the type to pull out her phone in moments like that, but something in Imani's voice had cut straight through her. The girl's scream. That sudden snap. It didn't matter who she was, not at the time. She was a teenager, in pain, afraid. She called her friend Margie, who lived on the next block. I saw the whole thing, Linda said. He never asked her anything, just grabbed her like she was a threat, like she didn't belong. Margie didn't sound surprised. You think the department's gonna back him? They always do. Across town, Simone Rollins was finishing up dinner prep when her phone rang. Not once, but 3 times in a row. When she finally picked up, it was her neighbor's daughter, Anna, nearly breathless on the line. Mrs. Rollins? Imani. She's okay, I think, but there was a cop. She's in an ambulance right now. People are posting about it. Simone dropped the spatula on the counter. What ambulance? What are you talking about? I think it's St. Luke's, Anna replied. I just thought you'd want to know before you saw it online. Simone didn't wait another second. She grabbed her keys and called her husband as she backed out of the driveway. Quincy, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Something happened to Imani. Her husband was already opening Twitter. 2 minutes later, he called back. Jesus, he whispered. Someone filmed it. It's already trending. Inside the emergency room, Imani lay on a narrow bed, her broken arm supported by a temporary splint. The pain meds dulled the edges, but she could still feel the wrongness of it all. She stared at the ceiling tiles, replaying every second in her head. The door opened. Her mom stepped in first. Fast, eyes full of panic and rage. She crossed the room in 2 long strides, brushing the nurse aside as she knelt beside Imani's bed. "Oh my God, baby. What did he do to you?" Imani swallowed hard. I told him I lived here. I told him my name." Her father followed a minute later. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking at his daughter, at her swollen wrist, her scraped knees, the tears drying on her cheeks. "Who was it?" he finally asked. "What's his name?" "I don't know. He never said." They sat with her in silence for a few minutes before the nurse came back in to explain the full fracture. Surgery might not be necessary, but recovery would take weeks. Imani barely listened. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Then another. "Don't look at it," Simone said. "It doesn't matter right now." But Imani had already seen it. A screenshot. A comment under the video. "Why's she even running here? Looks like she's casing houses." That one hit harder than the painkillers could numb. The ER door opened again, this time slower. A hospital security officer stepped in, followed by a woman in a dark jacket. Plain clothes. Badge clipped at the waist. "Mr. and Mrs. Rollins," she began. "I'm Detective Sarah Mencken with Internal Affairs. We're here to take a statement. There's already been substantial media interest." Denzel, Quincy, rose to his feet. "My daughter's not a headline," he said, voice low. The detective nodded. "I understand, sir, but this is going to be big." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. He just looked at his daughter, bruised and bandaged, and knew they'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Outside the hospital, reporters were already arriving. A local news van parked near the emergency entrance. And Officer Kellner? He'd been called back to the station, but not for punishment. Not yet. They said it was procedure. They needed his side of the story. He told his superior she resisted. He said she didn't identify herself. He insisted he had reason to believe she was dangerous, but no matter what he said behind closed doors, the truth was already out in the world, and the world was watching. Room 418 at St. Luke's smelled like rubbing alcohol and lemon floor wax. Imani lay quietly beneath a thin blanket, eyes half open, watching the IV line in her arm pulse gently with clear liquid. Her wrist had been stabilized and wrapped, but the bruising climbed up past her elbow like a slow burn. She didn't speak much. Her mother, Simone, sat by the window in silence. Quincy paced near the end of the bed, his phone never leaving his hand. Every few minutes it buzzed again. Reporters, friends, producers, family. The footage had been shared by 3 national outlets already. It wasn't just a local incident anymore. But in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that their daughter had been hurt. Hurt badly. Simone leaned in and brushed a strand of hair off Imani's forehead. "Do you remember everything that happened?" Imani's voice was soft, but clear. "Yeah, all of it." "Did he say why he stopped you?" She shook her head slowly. "He just said I looked suspicious. I told him my name. I told him where I lived. I told him I didn't have my ID because I was jogging." Simone blinked hard and looked away, pressing her lips together. Quincy stopped pacing. He stared out the window, jaw clenched. Then, finally, "Do you want to tell them who you are?" Imani turned her head toward her father. "He didn't care who I was, Dad. He didn't even ask." The room went still. "He didn't even see me," she whispered. "He just saw what he wanted to." They sat with that for a while. No one knew what to say. It was the nurse, a tall man named Javier, who finally broke the silence. He came in to check the IV and gently lifted Imani's injured arm to adjust the support. "You're a strong one," he said, smiling kindly. "Most adults would still be crying." Imani offered a half smile. "Hurts too much to cry." He chuckled softly. "That's real." As he stepped out, he paused and looked back at Quincy. "Sir, I'm a big fan of your work, but I'm even more of a fan of what I just saw. Quincy frowned. What's that? Javier nodded toward Imani. Your daughter. She held it together. I saw the footage. That's not just bravery, that's control. That's poise. You raised her right. Simone's voice cracked as she said thank you. Quincy looked down, unsure how to respond. Then his phone buzzed again. This time, with a message from his publicist. CNN wants a comment. NBC just ran it during prime time. He turned the screen toward Simone. She read it and nodded. They're going to twist it either way. Might as well say something before someone else does. Imani didn't speak, but her eyes were still open, listening. Simone leaned forward and took her daughter's hand gently. We're not doing this for attention, she said. You didn't ask for this, but if we don't say something now, they'll fill in the blanks themselves. A knock at the door. Another visitor. This time it was Reverend Marcus Bledsoe from a local church, someone the family knew through charity work. He stepped in slowly, removing his hat and looking at Imani with quiet concern. I came as soon as I heard, he said. Imani, sweetheart, are you okay to talk? She nodded faintly. He sat at the foot of the bed, adjusting his tie. You know, when people say they see themselves in the younger generation, it's usually just something we say to sound proud. But today, I mean it. He took a breath. You didn't deserve what happened. But how you carry yourself now, it matters. It will matter more than you think. Quincy finally sat down. We just want her to feel safe again. I don't even care about the headlines. I want to know she can run without fear, that she won't always have to look over her shoulder just to jog. Reverend Bledsoe nodded. Then let the world see her strength. Let them feel what it's like to be her, even if just for a minute. Let her voice come through. Imani glanced at her phone. Messages from classmates, old friends, and strangers flooded her screen. Some angry, some supportive, all watching. And for the first time since the incident, she felt something shift in her chest. Not relief, not fear, just weight. But what they didn't realize was that the weight of being seen can be just as heavy as being ignored. By sunrise the next morning, Imani's name was trending nationwide. The headline on one of the first national outlets read, Teen girl assaulted by officer during jog in upscale California neighborhood. A smaller subheading followed, victim confirmed to be daughter of actor Quincy Rollins. That was all it took. Social media exploded, not just with outrage, but with speculation. Old clips of Quincy from interviews, past speeches, even his film roles were recycled with comments like, he warned us, he's been talking about this for years. But the family hadn't said anything yet. Not officially. And that silence was starting to get loud. Simone and Quincy met privately with their legal team Sunday afternoon in a side conference room at the hospital. The blinds were drawn, the mood heavy. The team came with suggestions, strategies, carefully worded drafts. None of it felt right. She doesn't need a press release, Simone said flatly. She needs protection. One of the lawyers, a woman named Felice Monroe, took a breath. I get that. But you're not just Imani's parents right now. You're public figures. Whether you like it or not, what you say, or don't say, will set the tone for everything that comes next. Quincy rubbed the bridge of his nose. We're not looking to build a brand off of her trauma. Felice nodded. Then say that. Say it your way. But if you don't speak, someone else will speak for you. Or worse, they'll speak for her. Imani had remained quiet during the meeting. Until now. She shifted in her seat and looked up. Can I write it? Everyone turned toward her. You sure? Simone asked softly. Imani gave a small nod. I don't want people fighting for me. I want them to hear me. Later that night, she posted her statement, not through a publicist, not through Quincy's agent, but on her own Instagram account. Black text on a white background. No hashtags, no flashy font. I was jogging in my own neighborhood. I was doing everything right. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't run. I didn't lie. I just existed. And that was enough for someone to hurt me. Not because of who I am, but because of who they thought I was. I'm not speaking out because I'm famous. I'm speaking out because there are girls just like me who don't have the option to be heard. And I'm lucky. I get to recover. But what about the ones who don't get to go home? This isn't about getting justice because my dad's on TV. This is about justice that should have never needed a camera or a famous name. I want to run again, without being watched, without being followed, without being hurt. Within 2 hours, the post had more than 1 million likes. Comments poured in. Classmates, strangers, celebrities, fellow athletes, even some former victims of police abuse. Simone sat on the edge of the bed reading them out loud, occasionally pausing to hold back tears. She's getting messages from people in Cincinnati, from Oakland, from Spokane. Look at this one, she said. A girl her age says she quit running outside after the same thing happened to her last year. Quincy stared at the phone and sighed. How many more are there? They all knew the answer. Too many. Outside St. Luke's, more cameras were showing up. The hospital had to reroute some foot traffic through the side door just to avoid clogging the lobby. Protesters had begun gathering near the police department headquarters a few miles away, some with signs, some just holding up their phones. But inside, it was still just them, a family trying to stay whole while the world watched them grieve something that never should have been taken. A local pastor visited again that night, not Reverend Bledsoe this time, but a younger man named Tyree Marchand. He wasn't there to give advice. He just sat quietly with them, said a short prayer for peace, then looked at Imani and offered just one line. Your silence would have protected you, but your truth might save someone else. Imani didn't say much in return, but she remembered the words. And as they all watched the sun disappear behind the edge of the hospital parking lot, something began to shift. Not just in their family, but across the country. But the moment the world starts listening is when the real test begins. While Imani's story traveled across the country, Officer Brian Kellner remained mostly out of sight. He hadn't spoken to the media. He hadn't posted online. His department hadn't even released a formal statement beyond a vague acknowledgement of an ongoing internal review. But that didn't stop people from digging. It started with a Reddit thread titled, "Has Kellner done this before?" Less than 12 hours later, it had over 8,000 comments and 3 detailed timelines of his prior work in neighboring cities. The stories started to come together, and they weren't flattering. Kellner, 41, had transferred to Bellwood Hills PD just 2 months earlier after 7 years with the Norwood Police Department. In that time, he'd accumulated 5 complaints for excessive force. All closed, all dismissed, but none of that had been publicly disclosed, not until now. A journalist from Sacramento pulled the internal complaint logs using public record laws. In one of them, a black teenage boy had suffered a fractured collarbone after being stopped for matching the description of a car thief. Another incident involved a Latina woman who'd been tackled during a traffic stop, even though her only offense had been driving with a cracked taillight. None of those incidents had gone viral. No one in them had famous last names. And that, to many, was the point. Kellner's defenders, including the local police union, insisted he was a dedicated officer committed to public safety, and that attacks on his character without all the facts were unfair. They claimed he was simply doing his job. But pressure was building. Every major news station in the state had now picked up the story. One former police supervisor, speaking anonymously to a podcast, described Kellner as quick-tempered and hyper-focused on compliance. Another called him a powder keg, who never de-escalated when he could dominate instead. Quincy read the article aloud in their living room. Imani sat across from him, arms still in a sling, eyes heavy. I don't want to be the reason someone loses their job, she said quietly. Her mother shook her head. Baby, this isn't about revenge. I want him to know I'm not what he saw, Imani added. I want him to feel that. Simone looked at her daughter with tired eyes. I think he's feeling it now, for the first time. Meanwhile, inside Bellwood Hills PD, the atmosphere had shifted. Kellner was placed on administrative leave with pay, pending investigation. His office was locked, his nameplate quietly removed from the hallway wall. Officers avoided mentioning him by name. Some believed he'd be cleared, just like always. Others weren't so sure. A younger officer named Anthony Gentry sat in his squad car the following evening, replaying bodycam footage from Kellner's arrest reports over the last few weeks. One thing stood out: the tone. Always aggressive, never calm, always assuming the worst. He shook his head. He messed with the wrong family. He muttered to himself. But it was deeper than that, and Gentry knew it. Kellner didn't know who Imani was, and that's what made it worse. He didn't care who she was. He didn't ask. He acted the same way he had dozens of times before. Only this time, there were cameras. There was a name people recognized, and there was a teenager brave enough to speak. That same night, Felice, the family's attorney, received word from a DOJ liaison. A federal civil rights inquiry had been opened. Quiet for now, but serious. Simone put her hand over her mouth as Felice explained it over speakerphone. They're watching the footage. They're going to start interviewing witnesses. They're not just looking at Kellner. They're looking at the department too. Quincy exhaled. It's about time. But not everyone agreed. Protesters had started lining up outside City Hall. Some supported Imani, holding signs with her name and calling for accountability. But a small group gathered across the street carried signs reading, "Support our police, and don't rush to judgment." One of them, a woman in her 60s with short grey hair and sunglasses, told a reporter, "I don't care who her father is, you obey the police. That's it." The reporter didn't comment, just held the mic steady while the internet judged for itself. Back in the Rollins home, Imani scrolled through the news articles that night with a face of quiet disbelief. "How many people did he hurt before me?" she asked. Simone sat beside her. "Too many. But you stopped it." But the truth is, stopping someone like Kellner doesn't start with headlines. It starts with who's willing to listen once the spotlight fades. The temperature outside Bellwood Hills Police Headquarters had climbed into the high 80s, but that didn't stop the crowd. By noon, close to 400 people had gathered on the lawn, many holding signs with Imani's face printed across them, one from that summer STEM camp she loved. Some people wore black shirts that read, "Let her run." Others just stood silently with fists raised. Across the street, the counter-protest remained smaller but louder. One man with a megaphone kept repeating, "Law and order! Don't break it if you don't want to feel it!" His voice cracked under the heat, but the message was clear. Not everyone saw Imani as the victim. Inside the Rollins home, the blinds were drawn, and the family was doing their best to ignore the live coverage looping on 3 different news stations. Imani sat cross-legged on the couch, her injured arm resting on a pillow. "I didn't ask for all this," she said, not for the first time. Simone looked up from her laptop. "No one's saying you did?" Quincy stood behind the kitchen island, silent. He was watching his daughter, watching the room, like he was trying to take everything in without reacting too fast. "What if I go on camera?" Imani asked suddenly. Simone blinked. "You sure?" "I don't want to keep hiding. I have something to say. I just don't want them to twist it." Quincy walked over slowly. "If you speak your truth. Nothing polished, nothing written for you, just you." Imani nodded. So later that day, they agreed to a short live interview with reporter Elise Manning from Channel 12. Elise wasn't sensational. She had earned a reputation for letting people speak without pushing them into a corner. They met on neutral ground, a small community library down the street from the hospital. The cameras rolled. Imani sat with her arms still wrapped and supported. Elise spoke gently but didn't shy away. "Why did you decide to speak today?" she asked. Imani took a deep breath. "Because I want people to stop pretending this only happens when a camera's on. I want people to stop asking what we did to deserve it, and start asking why it keeps happening even when we do everything right." Elise nodded. "Some people say this story only made noise because of who your father is." "Maybe," Imani said. "But I'd rather it be quiet if it meant it never happened." It was raw, honest, and it hit. That clip aired just once, and within hours it had been reposted on every platform. Celebrities began weighing in. Serena Winston, the Olympic runner, tweeted, "That girl is stronger than most grown men. Let her run. Let her be." Civil rights attorneys and retired judges posted in support. A former federal prosecutor even said on a morning panel, this could trigger long overdue reforms in these small suburban departments. Still, the pressure cooker was heating from both sides. Inside the Bellwood Hills precinct, Police Chief Randall Odom held a private meeting with senior staff. He looked tired. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours in 3 nights. "We can't act like we didn't see what's on that video," he said. "I'm not here to throw anyone under the bus, but we're not going to survive this if we keep covering." A few of the older officers shifted in their seats. No one spoke first. Finally, Officer Gentry, the younger one who had quietly watched old Kellner body cam footage, raised his hand. "I think people want more than a suspension," he said carefully. "They want proof we're not protecting our own no matter what." Odom looked at him for a long moment. "That's what I'm afraid of." Across town, at a nearby middle school gymnasium, a community forum had been scheduled. The turnout was bigger than expected. They had to open the bleachers. Some people came to vent, others came to listen. But everyone came with something to say. A local teacher stood and told the room, "I've had students stopped just for walking to school, kids who learned to keep their hands out of their pockets before they learned to multiply." An older man followed her. "I've lived here 34 years, and I've never seen a cop grab anyone like that. Not once. Not unless they looked like her." A pause fell over the gym. Everyone knew what he meant. No one interrupted. Imani wasn't there that night, but her name echoed throughout the building, not because she was famous, but because she had become something else. A mirror people couldn't avoid anymore. But mirrors only help when people are willing to look at what's really being reflected. By the end of the week, the lawsuit was official. Filed in federal court, the Rollins family brought civil action against Officer Brian Kellner and the Bellwood Hills Police Department. The complaint listed unlawful detention, use of excessive force, assault resulting in bodily harm, and violation of constitutional rights. The language was clear, direct, and intentional. The city's legal team responded fast. Too fast, Simone thought. Within 24 hours, they issued a public statement filled with buzzwords. Reviewing all protocols, deeply regret the pain caused, and respect due process. But no apology. Not once. "They want it to sound like concern," Quincy said, tossing the folded press release onto the kitchen table. "But what they're really doing is circling the wagons." Imani sat nearby, watching a legal analyst break down the case on TV. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice measured. Felice Monroe had come over to walk them through it all. First, the discovery phase. They'll request footage, documents, reports. "We'll do the same," she explained. Then depositions. Witnesses. They'll try to drag this out. Test your patience. Maybe even your memory. They're hoping we get tired," Simone said flatly. Felice didn't disagree. But there was one thing the city couldn't control: the body cam footage. Though Kellner hadn't turned it on during the beginning of the encounter, the camera activated mid-incident when he manually called in for medical. What it captured in those final moments was devastating. Not just the screaming, the bending of her arm, but his tone. Aggressive, detached. No warning, no attempt to de-escalate. Worse still, a second officer had arrived as backup during the tail end. His bodycam footage showed Kellner muttering to himself as he stepped away from Imani, saying under his breath, "Every damn time, they act like they're the victim." That clip leaked online within 36 hours. The backlash was instant. It was no longer a "he said, she said." It was proof. In the middle of it all, Kellner's legal representation issued a statement attempting to frame his actions as standard procedure under heightened stress conditions. They cited rising calls to 911 about recent neighborhood disturbances. But reporters quickly discovered those calls didn't exist. No one on Bramble Street had made a call that day. Nothing was logged. The radio transcript showed no prior suspect alert, nothing matching Imani's appearance, behavior, or name. "He made it up," Imani whispered. Simone reached over and held her hand. "Or he didn't need to make anything up. Maybe he just thought what he saw was enough." That line stuck. It made its way into headlines, talk show panels, college classrooms. He just thought what he saw was enough. Meanwhile, the city's mayor, a man who hadn't said much, found himself under pressure. Community leaders were calling for change, for policy updates, for transparency. "I can't ignore what's happening," Mayor Colin Riggs finally said during a town press conference. What happened to Imani Rollins was wrong. It should never have happened. And if we don't fix what allowed it to happen, then we are all complicit. He ordered a full audit of the Bellwood Hills PD's complaint system and made promises to review all prior misconduct cases that had been closed without follow-up. It wasn't a solution, but it was more than words. And for the Rollins family, it signaled a shift. The case wasn't just about one officer anymore. It was about the entire system that let him operate unchecked. That let him transfer departments with a file full of red flags no one seemed to care about until now. That week, Imani returned to school with a wrap still around her arm. She walked into her first class with her head held high, quiet, but not small. Some students stood when she entered. A few even clapped. I didn't want them to make a scene, she told her mom later, but it felt good. I felt like I belonged there again. Quincy smiled. That's what matters most. Still, the legal fight was far from over. Depositions loomed. So did backlash. Online trolls had already begun twisting the story, questioning her character, her intentions. Imani knew it wasn't going to be easy, but she also knew she wasn't alone. But justice isn't about one courtroom. It's about every choice made when no one's watching. 2 months had passed since the day Imani Rollins went for a jog and left in an ambulance. Her cast had been removed, but her arm wasn't the same. It still ached on humid mornings, still felt tight when she stretched too far. Her physical therapist told her it might take a full year to feel normal again, or it might never feel quite the same. But the part that felt harder to heal wasn't her arm. It was what had settled in her mind since that day. It came out in small ways. The way she crossed the street early when a patrol car turned the corner. The way she triple-checked her ID was in her pocket before walking to the store. The way her voice tightened when she passed a stranger and felt their stare linger too long. She wasn't afraid. She was alert. There was a difference, but it didn't feel like freedom. Inside a modest community center in Stockton, the Rollins family sat side by side for a public town hall. This wasn't a press event. No microphones, no media, just rows of folding chairs, a circle of residents, and a simple sign taped to the wall. What does justice look like? The moderator, a retired judge named Wallace Downey, looked around the room. Before we talk about law, he said, let's talk about impact. Let's talk about the quiet damage this kind of thing causes. Imani didn't plan to speak, but when he opened the floor, she raised her hand. She stood slowly, using her uninjured arm to steady herself against the chair. I used to think justice meant consequences, she began. Like someone did something wrong, and something happened to them because of it. Heads nodded. But now I think it's more than that. I think justice is when people like me don't have to explain ourselves just to be left alone. When a mistake like the one that happened to me isn't normal anymore. When a name doesn't have to be famous for someone to listen. She looked around the room. Older folks, teachers, students, parents. I don't want a statue, she said. I just want to run again without thinking twice. A silence followed. A few people wiped tears. A young man in the back, about her age, clapped once. Then again, the room followed. Quincy watched his daughter and blinked back emotion. Simone reached for his hand and squeezed it. After the event, an older woman approached Imani. She wore a tattered green headscarf and smelled faintly of lavender. My granddaughter saw your video, she said, smiling gently. She keeps her chin up now when she walks to school. She used to hunch, like she wanted to disappear. But now she walks like you. Imani didn't know what to say. She just smiled, said thank you, and hugged the woman tight. Justice had become something different in her eyes. It wasn't a gavel. It wasn't even the court win they were pushing toward. It was seeing people shift, a little, because of what she went through. But not everyone had shifted. That same week, Officer Kellner's legal team requested to settle. A confidential agreement, no admission of guilt, a financial payout, no trial. Quincy read the offer and pushed the paper aside. We didn't go through this just to take a check, he said. Simone agreed. We're not selling our silence. Their lawyer, Felice, laid out the reality. Taking it public means more exposure, more attacks. It won't be clean, Imani answered before either parent could. I want it to be public. Felice nodded. Then we'll go to trial. Meanwhile, the city announced new guidelines for officer conduct, stricter policies for body cam usage, new training protocols for handling youth interactions, and a civilian oversight board to review complaints, the first of its kind in the county. Small steps, but real. And none of it would have happened without her. At home, on a warm Sunday morning, Imani laced her sneakers again, her arm still stiff but serviceable. She stood at the front door, earbuds in one hand, the other hovering over the handle. Quincy opened it for her. You sure? He asked. She looked up at him. Yeah, I need this. Simone kissed her forehead on the way out, and as she jogged past the same streets, past the same mailbox where it all happened, she felt it. Not relief, not safety. Just breath. And for now, that was enough. But justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it just looks like the chance to live without fear. 3 weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, a student group at Fresno State invited Imani to speak. The event wasn't huge, maybe 60 students in a lecture hall, most of them part of the school's criminal justice and sociology departments. No cameras, no flash, just folding chairs, notebooks, and the quiet sound of pens clicking. She stood at the podium with her left arm still visibly marked, the scar peeking from under her sleeve like a reminder she hadn't asked for. I didn't come here because I want to be a symbol, she said, scanning the room. I came because I think people deserve to hear what this feels like. Not what it looks like on a screen. What it feels like. She took a breath. It feels like being told you don't belong where you already are. It feels like your name means nothing until people know your father's. And then suddenly you become a headline. A few students nodded. One woman in the second row scribbled notes quickly, eyebrows pulled tight in concentration. And what about the girls whose fathers aren't known, who aren't believed, who aren't recorded? Silence. Thick, uncomfortable. I don't want to be a symbol, she repeated. But if people are going to watch me anyway, I might as well say something real. Afterward, a professor approached her privately. That was more honest than most people can handle, he said. Keep speaking. People need to be made uncomfortable. Imani smiled politely. But the truth was, she didn't want to keep speaking forever. She wanted to go back to her track team. She wanted to rejoin weekend meetups with her STEM club. She wanted to talk about graduation plans and dorm shopping and college cafeteria food, not press conferences and lawsuits. But life had already moved, and it had taken her with it. Outside the courthouse, a line formed the morning of the first hearing. Reporters, activists, residents, some who had driven hours just to be present. One woman held up a sign that read, "She belongs here." Inside, the atmosphere was tight. Lawyers shuffled papers, cameras clicked, and a court artist sketched Imani's face from a respectful distance. Kellner sat across the aisle, eyes forward, face hard to read. He didn't look at her. Not once. Her attorney gave the opening statement. This case isn't about celebrity. It's about dignity. It's about the rights of a young girl to move freely in a place she called home. It's about the kind of peace we should all have, but so few are given. The defense tried to reduce it to procedure, response protocols, officer discretion, miscommunication. But the video had already spoken. The audio had already exposed the intent. And the public? They weren't buying it. Still, no outcome was certain. After the hearing, Imani walked through the courthouse lobby with Simone beside her. A small group had gathered near the exit. Among them was a mother holding her son's hand. The boy couldn't have been more than 8. Is that her? The boy whispered. His mom nodded. That's Imani. He turned to her, eyes wide. You got hurt and still came back. Imani knelt a little, smiling. Yeah, I did. The boy reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded drawing, just a few colored pencil lines on printer paper. A girl running under a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, it read, "She's faster than hate." Imani held the drawing to her chest and nodded. Thank you. Later that night, Back home, she taped the picture next to her mirror. Not because she liked looking at herself these days, but because it reminded her that someone, somewhere, had seen her fully. Not just as a headline, not just as a story, but as a person who kept going. She sat on her bed, opened her laptop, and typed slowly. If you're watching this and thinking, this would never happen to someone like me, you're the person I needed to hear this the most. I was polite. I followed directions. I wasn't doing anything wrong, and it still happened. This story isn't tragic. It's not over. It's about what changes when you stop letting fear be the loudest voice in the room. Let's make sure the next girl doesn't need a famous name just to matter. She posted the message to her followers, turned off the screen, and lay back. Tomorrow, the trial would resume. Tomorrow, more people would talk. But tonight, she let herself rest. Not as a victim, not as a symbol, but simply as herself. And if this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Not because it happened to someone famous, but because it shouldn't have happened at all. Subscribe for more human stories that deserve to be heard and remembered.